Ladies and gentlemen, today we live in a VUCA world. Some of you may be familiar with this acronym, not least because it has been extensively used by CEOs over recent years. So what does it stand for? One could say very unique, classy association, as people that are here in this premises, or Vienna ultimate cultural adventure, which you may be experiencing throughout these days. But no, VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. An acronym used by the American military to describe extreme conditions in Afghanistan and Iraq, which is a combination of qualities that, taken together, seems to well characterize the constantly changing challenges brought on by politics, economics, society, and the environment. So basically, it indicates the end of linear logical recipes. The new normal requires comprehensive and contextual thinking in a world where knowledge reinvents itself every few years. Key issues in this context are no longer questions as to how to get from point A to point B, but a keen interest in how these points interrelate and enhance the utility of X, Y, and Z. So basically, since the emergence of the print culture in the 16th century, there have not been as dramatic transformations as in today's world. Research does not really agree on how to refer to this era, be it conceptual or connected, digital, or the new information age. But what they do agree upon is that today's societal changes are comparable to a Gutenberg scale. So today, universities have to educate young people to be capable of navigating this VUCA age with volatile and complex challenges in a climate of high uncertainty. To deal with these complexities and insecurities of the conceptual age, future graduates need to be creators and idea hamsters. They need to be meaning makers and pattern recognizers. Their skill set will have to go far beyond disciplinary expertise. They will require integrative, contextual, nonlinear, and critical thinking abilities. The ability to make a meaningful narrative and synthesize the seemingly divergent into a cohesive whole will become a strategic advantage. To ensure ambiguity tolerance and reduce uncertainty avoidance among students will be a major challenge for educators. And then there are those that refer to our times as the digital, as the connected age, and they can't be more right. Just look at the following pictures and try to spot the difference. Here you see the picture of 2005 at St. Peter's Square, when John Paul II's body is brought out for public viewing. The crowd was standing there waiting. Just 8 years later, St. Peter's Square again. And this is when France comes out to greet the public for the first time. What a difference it makes in 2013. Look at the sea of handheld devices waiting to get a snapshot of Pope Francis' inauguration. So yes, it is a connected, interconnected world, and we have to think about the ways technology is going to change our education. When thinking of the industrialization of information age, it becomes clear that for a country to be successful, it needs expert thinkers who can creatively meet unprecedented challenges. But it also needs complex communicators who can effectively analyze, clarify, persuade, and convey multiple and conflicting interpretations of information. This suggests that creative thinking will become at least as important as critical thinking. Data mining, big data, Internet of Things, cloud computing, data analytics, and many more are drivers for future developments in this knowledge area. So clearly, shift happens. But why? Due to what? And how does this impact higher education? And most importantly, what does this all mean for you, university presidents and executives that manage higher education institutions around the globe? These profound economic, social, and political transformations that the world is undergoing today is based on the global knowledge economy. The global knowledge economy depends on the creation and skillful application of new knowledge. Such an economy requires highly educated people with innovative ideas and skills of application and a contextual understanding of how to deal with complexity. Undoubtedly, knowledge workers need to continuously upgrade their skills to stay employable in this increasingly competitive world. To produce a workforce that has comprehensive disciplinary knowledge, broad generic skills, and the right attitude towards lifelong learning lies in the responsibility of higher education systems of a country. To increasingly know why, know how, and know who somehow outweighs the traditional know what in a world where global competition and international activities are pervasive. So clearly, nations worldwide, in order to stay competitive, require knowledgeable citizens, academically trained, innovative, and IT savvy. Subsequently, there is a worldwide boom in the demand of higher education, which has resulted in a massification of higher education. This has significantly changed the demographics of the student population worldwide. At the same time, the dichotomy between equity and excellence has become more and more obvious, and claims for access and social mobility on the one hand, with the continuous growth of private higher education institutions, particularly in Latin America and Africa. On the other hand, there is the fear of quality decline with the strengthened position of top-class research universities, rankings, and the role of accreditation bodies. Taking all these factors into account, it becomes clear that we are living in the midst of an academic revolution, unprecedented in scope and diversity, that has far and wide impact on the aims, structures, types, profiles of universities, on the composition of student body, on the curricular and mode of provision, and on the patterns of funding. I will try here now to narrow it down to three major challenges that contemporary societal changes bring about, which are complexity, diversity, and creativity. For one, there is no way that in this complex world, higher education institutions can stick to the status quo, can go on as normal in their traditional way of teaching, turning a blind eye to these transformations. Second, gone are the days where higher education was reserved to elites only. Never before has the university student been so diverse in terms of age, race, ethnicity, and gender. And thirdly, in former days, intensive specialization was key, and most problems were solved by I-shaped, so to say, specialist knowledge alone. This, so it seems, is no longer applicable for contemporary multidimensional challenges of today. So to use Albert Einstein's word, we cannot solve today's problem with the same thinking that we used when we created them. The question we are currently facing is how can higher education institutions equip a highly diverse student population in ways that they can best navigate this complex world with a toolkit of creative and innovative solutions and methods. The key message here is that in order to solve today's interconnected and highly complex challenges, one requires a contextual understanding of the world. So disciplinary-based knowledge is essential, clearly, but it needs to be embedded in lifelong learning. For teachers, this means that the days of the sage of the stage are over. High-impact teaching methods are required to engage students in critical thinking, in reflective loops, and also to see beyond their often narrow disciplinary confines. T-shaped skills are a razor that can cut through all the complexity. An increase in widespread participation of the massification of higher education over the last several decades has driven many of these key transformations. This means that higher educations will have to cope more and more with new students, so-called non-traditional students, be they professionally qualified, mature students with disabilities, internationally mobile. This also means that there are more inclusive higher education systems needed and hybrid teaching methods. The key message here is that diversity is no longer a problem to eliminate, but a foundation of strength and resilience. At the same time, and in view of newly emerging student populations across the world, higher education has become a profitable marketplace where privatization and commercialization has turned out to be a thriving business, not always in line with high-quality education. Due to the nature of today's business environment and the pace of change, contemporary problems need to be addressed in novel, in non-routine ways by highly educated people that have innovative ideas. The best solutions to these ill-structured problems come when we engage our capacity for creative thinking and combine it with an entrepreneurial mindset. This also requires a culture of risk, where failure is something good, something we can learn from, an entrepreneurial mindset and proven willingness to make something that is good even better. We as universities need to provide places where this can happen, where students can work things out in fab labs, in maker spaces, and above all, work together in interdisciplinary innovation projects. Steve Jobs, one of the greatest minds of our time, an idea hamster, someone who was looking beyond the obvious. He revolutionized how we consume entertainment, access information, and stay in touch by making iconic devices that are brilliantly designed. He perfectly understood that technology alone is not enough. It is specialization and contextualization, or as he puts it, technology married with the liberal arts, with humanities, that yield us the results that make our hearts sing. So let's reimagine higher education. In order to be successful, we need to go from teaching content to learning content and acquiring competences. We need to go from increased specialization to specialization that is put in a broader context. We need to go from technology transfer to integrated, people-centered innovation. The concept of citizen science and the growing demand for universities' third mission are examples for that. So there are basically 4 future trends that drive the field of education, research, and innovation. They are digitalization, grand challenges, globalizations, and new actors, and I will touch on them individually. Number one, digitalization. The demand for global access to knowledge is a substantial driver for big topics such as massive open online courses, the so-called MOOCs, flipped classroom, and other hybrid modes of learning. In terms of research, open science or Science 2.0 are key, so to say, new approaches to science that uses information sharing and collaboration made possible by network technologies. As to innovation here too, open innovation is foregrounded, and industry or services 4.0, a current trend of automation and data exchange in manufacturing technologies, is key. It includes cyber-physical systems, the Internet of Things, cloud computing, you name it. Future trend number two is what is called by Trunnisser et al. The grand challenges. What is meant by that? The grand challenges are planetary boundaries, such as climate change, urbanization, sustainability, health issues, genetic diversity, land system change. To tackle these cross-border challenges, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches are needed, both in teaching and research. As to innovation, it requires comprehensive global strategies for basic and applied research. Innovation needs to generate solutions that have a sustainable impact for society. Let's look at future trend number three, which is globalization and the disintegration of existing structures. In terms of education, global knowledge systems emerge. Another element that comes into play is the mobility of excellent students and excellent academics, the so-called brain gain factor. Here again, both in teaching and research. So international R&D strategies are becoming key in this global arena. In such a competitive context, it appears vital that specific regions find their USP to stand out from the crowd and have a somehow competitive edge. The last trend I'd like to outline here is what is referred to as new actors. By this, it is meant that new players, additional stakeholders enter the scene with new interests, different values, here again, different, maybe conflicting approaches and procedures. For teaching and research, this means new sources of funding, but it also means benefit-oriented research with civic engagement, mutual exchanges between university and society, regional engagement, social innovation. So basically a contribution to socio-economic development, where university is a co-creator for sustainability, be it via crowdsourcing or crowdfunding. My next slides zoom in on higher education technology adaptation and give a brief overview of the findings of the brand new Horizon report. This report was compiled by experts of 22 countries. The first Horizon report dates back to 2004, and since then, every year, emerging technologies and new teaching practices have been highlighted. They identified 6 meta categories. So we have already heard about expanding access and the need for increased innovation. We also learned that authentic learning experiences need to be encouraged. For that to happen, the teaching profession needs to be improved. A further movement in higher education is the one of tracking and evaluating evidence. Institutions are becoming more adept at leveraging data to inform decision-making across departments and campuses. And finally, spreading digital fluency. While digital tools have become ubiquitous, they need to be integrated in the learning process in meaningful ways. Simply being able to use devices is not enough. Instead, it's important to make connections between tools and intended outcomes, as well as creatively leverage technology in different contexts. So if we look at short-time trends, then online and blended learning offerings that complement traditional classroom activities on campus seem to be broadly implemented within the next 1 or 2 years. Within the next 3 to 5 years, particular emphasis will be placed on redesigning learning spaces, as I've already mentioned, fab labs or maker spaces and so on. As institutions are facing pressure from accreditation bodies and governing agencies to document student achievements and learning outcomes, this progress may be facilitated by learning analytics. Universities use statistical and data mining tools to recognize challenges early, improve student outcomes, and personalize the learning experience. If you look beyond 5 years, then the report predicts a cultural shift in institutional leadership towards agile startup models that foster flexibility, creativity, and entrepreneurial thinking. Another long-term trend outlined by the report are deeper learning approaches that favor hands-on and student-centered experiences, giving students more freedom to be creative without rigid guidelines. In addition to this list, the report also lists 6 challenges that are not charted on a timeline, but categorized as solvable, difficult, and wicked, depending on how well we understand the scope of the problem and its potential solutions. What was identified as solvable are improved digital literacy by adding that both student and staff require support and ongoing training. Another solvable issue was found by the integration of formal and informal learning. On a critical note, it needs to be stated here, however, that institutions still struggle to acknowledge and validate informal learning experience, and there still seems to be a long way to go. When looking at difficult challenges, then the report states what is called in this context the achievement gap, as a disparity of enrollment, academic performance, and completion between student groups defined by socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, and gender. Another difficult challenge to tackle is advanced digital equity. So access to technology, particularly broadband internet, is not equal around the world. The most complex, so-called wicked challenges were identified in the management of knowledge obsolescence. So just as the faculty and staff have mastered one technology, a new version is launched. Staying current and organized represents a challenge to the academic world. The second wicked issue is how to rethink the roles of educators. Educators are expected to skillfully leverage a variety of digital tools, active learning methodologies, as well as online discussions and collaborative authoring. Finally, let's look at the timeline for development in technology. So what will come within the next year or so are adaptive learning technologies and mobile learning. The Internet of Things and the next generation LMS will gain momentum within the next 2 to 3 years, and artificial intelligence and natural user interfaces will pick up speed in about 4 to 5 years. The last trend I would like to sketch here is the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, where institutions of higher learning most certainly will have a decisive contribution as incubators of innovation and transformative institutions. While sustainable development goals are not legally binding, governments are still expected to take ownership and establish national frameworks for the achievement of these 17 goals. One particular goal is dedicated to quality education. So if we look more closely at SDG 4, then it is sought to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. Higher education institutions need to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Quality education is an integral part of the Action Plan 2030 and addresses equal access for women and men to affordable and quality education. Universities are sought to promote human rights, gender equality, culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity. Leaders are learners, so it is in this spirit that I'm confident that you will have plenty of opportunity during this event to exchange inspiring ideas, to engage in fruitful cooperation, and strengthen existing networks. On this note, I would like to end my speech with John F. Kennedy, who wisely stated that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. So let's continuously get better and head for new shores. Thank you.
You pose one interesting problem, a very challenging problem, is what happens to quality as you get more diversity. You pose it as a problem. I don't know if you have any idea of who solved it and how can it be solved.
Yes, this is exactly what I was pointing out when I talked about equity versus excellence. And I think that what I pose as a problem is that there are many now, higher education is going privatized, or is going to become privatized. So a lot, and I'm sure you know, a lot of privatized businesses offer higher education, and that is definitely a quality issue. But if you, and I think one of the biggest points to solve that is to have really strong accreditation bodies that look at quality and make it not hard, but harder for those private universities to actually endeavor into this field.
Thank you for your talk. Would you say a bit about where education leads to employment and the role that universities and in this transformative curriculum have in making sure their graduates get jobs?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest concepts of our days is graduate employability. So especially in Europe, the Bologna process very much sets towards graduate employability, so that curricula are really practice-oriented, as I pointed out, maker spaces, all kind of doing that. Of course, we need abstract levels of knowledge, but then again, we need to apply it, and this application will hopefully, and this is one of Bologna's way to guarantee graduate employability of our graduates in the future.
Thank you. Good morning. Jisman from Indonesia. You discussed about connectivity and the new waves of technologies, Internet of Things, etc. Watching what is happening around us, my feeling is that we are increasingly disconnected from one another. We are increasingly granularized rather than connected increasingly. Can you comment on this?
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more to what you were just saying. I also have the feeling that connectivity on the one hand is something great and we can reach each other. We talk about flexibility of the workspace and so on. Your boss can reach you whenever, wherever, which is a good thing. On the other hand, and I couldn't agree more, if you now look at all those people walking with their cell phones, not talking to each other anymore, this is for sure a big issue that society will have to address. So I agree that on the one hand, of course, it's a positive has many positive aspects, but it also has a downside to that. Yes, agree.
So I do have a question myself, somehow related to the last one. So you mentioned several technologies from the field of computer science, like Internet of Things, machine learning technologies, big data analytics, and so on, which of course can act as enablers for new interdisciplinary fields, as they already do, like we see it in Industry 4.0. And in terms of education, do you think we should rather go away from teaching very specialized persons to somehow more generalized persons, or to interconnect or specialists, bring them speaking more together, break down borders between communities and so on and so on? What do you think is the right way there?
There is no way that, as I call it, I-shaped knowledge, so a specialist knowledge, is of course key. It's very important. But the way I put it is that you need to have also a T-shape. You need to have a broader contextualization of what you do. So a good thing would be to, of course, teach students disciplinary knowledge, but to let them work in interdisciplinary teams, to kind of make them work with innovative, different other disciplines and so on, so that they kind of broaden their perspectives. I think that will be the future key to success, to solve complex challenges as we have today.
So are there any further questions?
Yes, please, I have a question. My name is Nouar Dia from Lebanese American University. I noticed a point you mentioned regarding a trend towards a decline in intellectual property. And where I come from, we still work very hard with our students on instilling this culture of ethical conduct, using Turnitin for tracking sources and so on. So can you please explain this point more? Thank you.
Of course, these are not my findings. These are the findings of the report that I was stating, of the Horizon report. But I think the big issue that's going on now is open innovation and open access to knowledge. So I think that also what we call is that universities have to make a contribution to society, open up, and not to be too rigid in their confines of disciplinary thinking. And I think this is the way that especially this report indicates, that having open access to knowledge, having open repositories and so on, will be the future path to go, the way I understood it.
Ownership?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
If we put our published research, the ones we publish in those journals, if we put them on ResearchGates and other sites, wouldn't that be in breach of the privacy rules and regulations?
Yes, I think it's a question of the journal, and there might be journals that are fine with that and others are not. So this, of course, has to be double-checked whether this is feasible. But I think in future, this will be a more open approach towards research in general.
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I'm from the new country of California. Our students at my university come to the campus with 9 or more web-enabled devices. They can solve short-term problems. They have very little patience to spread their learning over time. And they really can't, they mistake their technology for deep learning. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you'd comment on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think another big issue I haven't touched about is the surface versus the deep learning approaches. And most of the students, nowadays people always say Generation Y, they are all digital natives. But yes, they are digital natives in terms of using the device, but can they really code? Can they really, do they have digital literacy as we always think they have? So as you just said, they don't have the patience, they just want to have it done quickly, and they are users without really creatively adding any content. Can they add content? Can they work with it? So I think this is a misconception a lot of people have nowadays, that Generation Y are digital natives, and that's how they are. But I don't think so, that this is not true.
Good morning. Thank you, Martina, for an excellent synthesis of some of the issues. My name's Tim. I'm from the other Austria, down south, called Australia.
Okay.
One of the fundamental assumptions, I think, which is made here is often that universities own higher education. And traditionally, we have always been able to do that because we have owned knowledge. We no longer own the knowledge, and so therefore we question as to whether or not we can actually own higher education. And you talk about the competitive entrance through non-traditional players, and you talk about regulation in the form of accreditation, but where we've seen digital disruption everywhere, attempts by regulators have dismally failed. So why do you think that regulation in higher education can possibly be a solution here, if indeed there needs to be a solution? And I would actually turn the question around the other way and say, what actually is it about universities that sort of gives them fundamentally the right where consumers want to consume our product? And so I think there needs to be a deeper conversation about what actually our product is offering, and that eventually turns to, and I think the question over there is quite relevant, turns to graduate outcomes. So we have the capability to own now a qualification called a degree, be it bachelor, master, etc. But as the workforce changes and potentially that qualification has less value in the marketplace, what are we left with?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're completely right. On the one hand, I agree with the fact that, of course, regulation is not everything. But on the other hand, especially, as I said before, privatization and a lot of new players come into the game. And maybe, I mean, it's a question of quality education. So what quality are you going to offer? So somehow regulation might be a feasible thing to look at. On the other hand, I'm quite confident that it will be the labor market that will, in the end, regulate whether the graduates that you produce as a university are really employable. So graduate employability will definitely drive the outcome of each university. And we cannot turn a blind eye to this broader access. We cannot turn a blind eye to non-traditional students coming and definitely applying at, of course, not all kind of elite universities, but here, as you know, in Austria, most of the universities are for free. So, of course, this is a driver for non-traditional students to come and to access to enter universities.